Earlier you mentioned violent revolution. At what point in the political degeneration of a nation does revolution become a justifiable course of action for citizens to take against a state which initiates force against them as a matter of policy?
Well, the most obvious and first dividing line that occurs to me is the point at which free speech and free communication are no longer possible. As soon as you have lost the right to free speech, I consider that crucial. You have the moral right to revolution. Further, I would say, when individuals are imprisoned for purely political crimes, when you have sentences passed without trial, when people can be sent to jail without proper trials, without due process of law, all of these clearly are beyond the point of a mixed situation. You are now talking about a dictatorship, and in such a situation, revolution is certainly permissible, I'm tempted to say mandatory. But the first and most crucial fact that occurs to me, the dividing line, is, do you have means effectively to protest your condition, to spread opposing ideas? Is there freedom of communication? As soon as a government prevents that, it loses all moral right to exist. Then it becomes a practical issue when and how people should seek to overthrow such a government.
In a society governed by objectivist political principles, no man or group of men would be permitted to gain values by means of force or fraud. In such a society, would religious institutions, such as modern churches, be permitted, since they attempt to gain values from individuals by means of promises which they cannot fulfill?
Well, here we go back to an earlier point that I made. It's not the function of government to pass judgment on the validity of abstract ideas. Secondly, religions don't make a secret of the fact that acceptance of their position entails and requires faith. So from that point of view, they're not being fraudulent. But the most crucial element is that when we deal in the realm of philosophical or abstract ideas, it would be disaster to empower a government to decide which philosophical ideas are true and which are not. Think of what that would lead to. Imagine that a publisher publishing a book on some subject wrote on the jacket copy, "This is a very valuable book. It will give you an entirely new perspective on life that will enrich your life in every way." And the government bureaucrat reads the book and says, "This is baloney. There isn't an original thought in this book. We're going to sue the writer and the publisher for fraud." I think you can appreciate how untenable that would be. So the more distance that exists between the government and any effort to evaluate philosophical ideas, the better.
The key difference between the limited government advocated by the objectivists and the agencies which are advocated by many anarchists is that the objectivist limited government would claim and exercise a monopoly on the use of retaliatory in a given geographical area. Why is this specific characteristic a necessary condition of man's proper survival in a social context?
I think that Ms. Rand answered this question very effectively in her article on the nature of government, which appears originally in the Objectivist newsletter, then subsequently in The Virtue of Selfishness, and again in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. You see, the use of force is so dangerous, so potentially terrible, that even when used in retaliation against an initiator of force, the protection of the lives and property of citizens require that the use of force be under objective law. Now, an objective law that no one is in a position to enforce or to sustain is a farce. The significance, and this is the central point of my whole quarrel and disagreement with the anarcho-capitalists, is the failure to appreciate the importance of having a central body of law known to everybody in advance, with very clearly formulated rules of evidence, legal procedures, graded for different types of offenses, with worked out procedures for dealing with real or alleged instances of the infringement of someone's rights. I cannot envision any type of society of any size or magnitude where there is not going to be this need for a written constitution and a central government whose function it is to carry out these tasks.
Would the government in an objectivist society have the power to force agencies of defense and retaliation to cease their activities if these agencies restricted their actions to defense and retaliation, followed objective rules of procedure, and made their records open for public examination? If so, wouldn't this constitute the use or threat of force against those who have not themselves initiated physical force? And if not, if these agencies continue to operate, would a government continue to exist? A government, properly speaking, being an agency with exclusive power to enforce certain rules of social conduct in a given geographical area.
The key word in your question is the word enforce. In any free society, there can be any number of private voluntary arbitration agencies. And I think that in a fully free society, many more would develop than exist even today. So that today, for example, there are contracts written between people where there is a stipulation that in the event of some clash, they will submit the problem to a private voluntary arbitration board and agree to respect its conclusions. In a free society, I think that would happen very, very often. The question would remain, what happens if somebody makes that voluntary commitment and then refuses to honor it? It is at that point that in a libertarian society, as I envision it, the parties would appeal to the government, in effect as the court of final dispute. Now, what may private agencies not do? They may arbitrate, they may stipulate fines. What they cannot do is impose physical punishments, such as putting a person in jail. This is the point where physical force enters the picture, that process has to be under the jurisdiction of the government. This is specifically the aspect which pertains to physical force. You want to voluntarily agree to fines? Okay, no problem. You want to have private umpires? No problem. It is whenever physical force enters that you need a central body of objective law and the government there to see that that law is respected. That is the point at which the issue arises. Now, if you dispute that, then the agencies are saying, remember, there are different agencies in your society. They are saying, we have a right to exercise the use of force at our own discretion so far as the rest of the society goes. That is the position, no matter how you slice it, that they are claiming. I say nobody has that right, except in an immediate short-term situation if somebody is physically attacking you on the street and there's no policeman around. Of course you have a right to defend yourself. But even there, if you kill a man, you're going to have to explain later to the law why it was necessary.
One of the central objections which objectivism has against free market anarchism, which advocates competing agencies of protection, defense, and retaliation, is in such a society there would be no final authority governing the use of force. Why is it impossible for differing agencies in such a society to agree on a method of handling disputes in advance and to deal with conflicts allegedly necessitating a final authority in that manner?
It's not impossible for men to agree on anything. In a way, I think I've already answered your question. Men can agree on anything. So long as they do not use physical force to implement their positions, they have no problem in a libertarian society. It all comes back to what happens when somebody decides that the execution of his position requires resorting to physical force. It's at that point, for all the reasons given by Rand in her piece on the nature of government, you need that central government. That is the whole pivotal point, and I've had many discussions with anarcho-capitalists on that position. I have never gotten an answer that made sense to me. I am always open to talk to intelligent representatives of that position. I think there are some intelligent representatives, not a great many, but I have met some very intelligent people who take that position for reasons that are still, I have to say, incomprehensible to me. I don't understand the attraction which that position holds. I think it represents a very real blindness to the practical problems of living in society, but I have never received an intelligible response to that particular issue.
Doesn't the objectivist argument in favor of a final authority to resolve disputes among men in the same geographical area logically lead to advocacy of a world government, since disputes are possible between citizens of differing nations?